Hello and welcome to Sustain, the podcast where we talk about sustaining open source for the long haul. Who are we? Where did we come from? Where are we going? How come I didn't develop a lovely Scottish accent? I really wish I had. It's just a great shame of my life that I haven't. Very excited to talk to our guest today who does have one of those. Before I introduce him, I want to make sure you know who the other voices are in this podcast. I am, of course, your host, Richard Littauer. Hello, everyone. And it's great to be here after taking a short break. We haven't had a podcast in a while, but I am very happy to be back today talking to our guest. I'm also very happy to be joined by my longtime friend, co-conspirator, co-host, Justin Dorfman, the man of Dorf. Justin, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Richard. It's so nice to be back. I'm really excited to talk to Neil, and let's go.
That's right. Justin just took the thunder and introduced our guest. We have Neil Chue Hong on here today. Neil is the director of the Software Sustainability Institute, SSI, at the University of Edinburgh, or at least in Edinburgh. It's affiliated with it. That's where he's from and where he lives. Neil, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good, Richard. And thank you, Richard, Justin, for having me on the podcast.
Thank you for coming on. I've been meaning to have you on for a while for a variety of reasons. One of them is that you work at an organization called Software Sustainability Institute, which at one point I was like sort of tearing my hair out, being like, should we even have a Sustain when SSI already exists? Why does Sustain exist? So I've resolved those questions now in my head, but I would love to hear more. What does the SSI do?
We've obviously crossed paths a number of times talking about what it means to sustain software and sustain open source software. And with the Software Sustainability Institute, we were trying to work out how do you do this for the kind of software that is used by researchers or used in research. This is kind of like our big thing. We've got this motto, better software, better research. And what we're trying to do is understand what are the different types of practices, the different types of techniques, all of the new things that are coming through that will help people who are both using software and developing software and research do a better job.
So tell me about the funding model. Is SSI a small consultancy? Is it a government-funded agency? Where does it fit?
What we are is a funded collaboration. So we get funding from our national research funder in the United Kingdom, which now is UKRI, UK Research and Innovation. And we're given this core funding to enable us to provide a number of different types of services and initiatives to the community. So we've always had funding that's come from the government and from the taxpayer. And then we supplement this with other forms of income as well through projects and through sponsorship as well. So it's basically everyone who has an interest in making sure that the software that's being used in research is sustainable.
How long has SSI been around?
It's kind of amazing to think that we started off in 2010 and we've got funding now to run till 2028. So that makes us a teenager now, and we'll be a full-grown adult by the time we get to the end of this block of funding. I still can't believe that we've been going this long. And it's really good to see that there's been a lot of change since 2010.
Was that the UKRI award?
Well, so back then, there wasn't even a UKRI. So in 2010, we were still in the land of the individual 7 research councils. So in the UK, what we have is we have different national funders that are split out based on the kind of disciplinary areas. And when we started in 2010, we'd just come out of a sort of large initiative called the eScience program, which was looking at doing a whole sort of things with digital infrastructure and digital technologies, working between both people who are in the university sector and then also in industry and bringing them together and creating these really big collaborations that were creating software applications, software infrastructure. And out of all of that, there was this realization that what happens next? So what happens after the sort of really big funding goes away and you start going back to the normal levels of funding for things like software? So we predate UKRI.
Have you been the director since its founding?
I know, it's crazy, isn't it? Yes, I have. So previously, I kind of like hopped around roles every 3 years or so, but I have been in the hot seat for the last 15 years now.
So looking a bit at the website, software.ac.uk, however you want to pronounce it, Excellent URL. We have 210 fellows, over 10,000 research software engineers, 8,000 researchers, 120 guides, 260 plus successful collaborations, however you're defining what a successful collaboration is. Very big numbers, very successful, been going on for ages. I want to hone down on one particular thing there, which is research software engineers, RSE. RSE is a term that we've covered before on this podcast, but I wanted to bring it up with you because in 2010, RSE wasn't necessarily a term. And I wonder, has the SSI been instrumental in building RSEs out? And how do you situate yourself as opposed to, say, UK RSE or RSE US or the New Zealand one, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah. So back in 2010, the term research software engineer wasn't in common usage. There were a couple of organizations who'd used it in the past, earlier in the kind of 2000s. But at that time, and kind of heading into the start of the Software Sustainability Institute, there wasn't the sort of professionalization around the building of software in the academic space. So in the UK, at least, there were a few places, and actually the centre that I'm based at the University of Edinburgh, EPCC, was one of them. So there were 2 or 3 places across the UK which did have pools of software engineers working in an academic context. But most software development was being developed by research associates, by PhD students, and so on. I think one of the things that came out of this program called the eScience program, where we had industry working with academia, was a greater understanding of the role that software engineering played in these projects, but also that the way that you applied software engineering didn't quite transfer directly from industry, mostly because of the different sizes of budgets, the different ways that teams operated, and indeed just the challenges with trying to define what it was you were building. So around about 2012, we've been holding a conference that we call the Collaborations Workshop, which brings together people from lots of different disciplines who are both on the technical side, the research side, the policy side. And it's an unconference where people get to bring up all of the different topics that they feel are the real kind of touchstone points for the current year. And in 2012, there was a group of us who gathered in a room and went, this software development isn't really being recognized. And one of the challenges is that it's very hard to see the scale of how much is being done if we don't understand who's doing it. And we can't really understand who's doing it unless we give it a name. And so that was the kind of genesis of the research software engineering movement.
That is super exciting. And it's been very successful ever since then, just by the amount of space I've seen dedicated to RSEs. A short note on the Collaborations Workshop. That's going to be happening again this year. It happens every year. It'll be in May. It looks like it'll be the 13th, 14th, and 15th in Stirling. And you can still register online if you're in the UK and you're able to attend in person.
That's right. And so you can attend in person. It's going to be a wonderful venue. And also you can attend online as well. So we are a full hybrid conference.
I'm glad you brought up collaborations because that's one thing that kind of, when I was on your website earlier, it kind of caught my eye. It was like the 260 plus collaborations. What's one that like stuck out where it was just like, wow, this kind of changed the game or really took us to the next level?
One of the things that I just can't imagine that we did this was when we started off in 2010, we weren't doing any form of training whatsoever, partly because we didn't think we could do it with the resources that we had available, and partly because doing training is a very specialized kind of role. It requires quite a lot of startup costs. It requires you to have a large contact base. It really is something that is beneficial, but hard to do initially. It's hard to get started. And so I think one of the kind of key collaborations around about the same time that the research software engineering movement was taking off was with someone called Greg Wilson, who came over, who was the head of software carpentry at that time. And it's actually kind of funny the way that there are all of these different little connections within the community. So Greg was actually the first permanent employee of this thing called EPCC. So he'd been at Edinburgh way before I joined EPCC. I was back visiting and mentioned this thing that he was doing in the States and wondered whether we and also some people down at UCL would be interested in running some courses based on his software carpentry curriculum. And so that started a collaboration where I think it's really set in place the model that we use in the Software Sustainability Institute around trying to act as a kind of backbone organization to help amplify the work of others. And now we're in a whole set of different things around training across lots of different disciplines and different areas. And I don't think we could have done that without the collaboration with Software Carpentry to start with, and now the continuing collaboration that we have with the Carpentries.
And we've had Kari Jordan, the current executive director, on this podcast recently. You should go check her out. It's a great episode. I think we've also had Jonah Duckles on here before. If we haven't, Jonah, let me know. He also used to run the Carpentries. So it's amazing how small the world is of software, which it's also very large, but also very small. One of the main questions I had coming onto this podcast is, since you started so early, the software sustainability field is different now than it was back in the early days. And I'm curious how you focused on research and how you talked about sustaining open source as being part of that. I know open source is a small part of research software, but it's still a large part. I'm just really curious, how do you hone in and choose what to do at SSI?
I wish I could say that I had a great answer to that. I think part of it has been trial and error. Certainly the early days, we did a lot of consultancy and we were doing direct work with different research groups, helping them build out things like test frameworks and so on. But I think the kind of key thing that has always been the sort of the motivating factor behind how we evolve what we do in the Software Sustainability Institute is trying to understand how we reach bigger and broader scales. So how can we kind of reach more people, both by the numbers and also the types of people that we're interacting with? And so that's been a big part of how we choose what we do. It's the reason why we moved from mostly doing consultancy to doing training, from doing training to doing community initiatives like our fellowship program, which gives us a really great network of ambassadors around lots of different disciplines and now increasingly around the world. And then more recently, moving towards doing things around collecting evidence to help policymakers so that we can both work bottom up through the training and then also top down through the funders and policymakers. So trying to make sure that we understand how we scale. And as I kind of put it, making sure that we are sort of putting ourselves out of business because other people can come and take over the stuff that we've done and we kind of proven works. So it's a scary thing to think that we have to change every so often, but it's also good to kind of keep things fresh.
SSI has a large amount of people who are involved with it. On staff, how many people do you have? I'm just curious.
It's about 16 full-time equivalent staff, and that's spread out across now, I think about 22 headcount. We're neither a small organization now nor a large organization.
That helps frame this next question really well, because 16 staff times 18 years, that's a lot of money. But you also have clearly shown that you're able to figure out how to talk to policymakers, because policymakers are also the people who normally write large checks. And one of the reasons I want to bring you on this podcast today was because you have launched the Research Software Maintenance Fund, RSMF, which is a new funding initiative with $4.8 million dedicated to supporting existing research software, which means that you convince someone that this is worth doing. Who is that someone and what does this do?
Yeah, so this is funding that has come from the UKRI's Digital Research Infrastructure Program. So this is a relatively new program over the last 3 years, which is trying to bring together all of the different individual investments into the sorts of things like compute and data and network, and also software and the skills around this, so that we're not trying to do this once for every different research council and every different discipline, but for the things which are more generic, that we can make sure that there's some sort of integration and cohesion around the way that investment is being made. And in particular for this Research Software Maintenance Fund, what's been clear across a number of different similar initiatives in the past at individual funders is that there is this requirement to make sure that software isn't just being funded through research grants, your standard research grants, because those are involved in understanding how you produce novel products. They're not there to help you pay for all of the sort of the boring maintenance work, although I'm sure that all of us on this podcast find that the interesting part, but the thing that's hard to fund. And so I don't think that we've necessarily had to do a huge amount of persuading. I think there's been a lot of work that's been done by others to show the real necessity for these sort of programs. But I think what's been key here is showing that it's useful to be able to do this without setting too many boundaries. So the way that software is developed is it's not somehow kind of stuck in a national boundary or anything like that. It really is global, and the collaboration on some of these pieces of software is truly international. So I think the one thing that we had to persuade our funder to do is to let the money go outside of the sorts of people that they would be able to fund normally.
I've seen a few large-scale grants being dedicated towards country-specific high compute centers. You know, you have Argonne in Chicago, you have Nessie and Riens in New Zealand, you have Horizon Europe going on in the EU. And a lot of them are sort of focusing on collaborations, but they're also focusing on building up the capacity to have large HPC, high-powered computing, and also research software. A lot of that ends up being research software, whether it's in biomedical fields or other things like genetics. Do you think this is part of that larger geopolitical play where the UK is trying to set itself up as being ahead of this industry? And if so, is this grant meant for that sort of thing, or is it meant more for individual researchers and maintainers?
It's a really good question, because I think particularly over the last few years, there's been this idea of kind of like sovereign capability, and that extends to things like software as well. In this case, I think it's less that and more a desire to be seen as maintaining the UK's place as basically a country which has always valued software and always invested in software. So I think it's more a continuation of that. But there is always the ongoing questions that you have around, should there be, for instance, computational chemistry codes that are developed in the UK as opposed to only developed in France or in the US? And so I think that increasingly those sorts of conversations are being had. Personally, I think one of the things that's really good is that we are quite open-minded to understanding how we might join forces with others. And I think it depends a lot on which research area you're in as well. But I think the one thing is that software doesn't have a physical home. And so unlike a high-performance computing center, and I'm based at the UK's home for the National Supercomputing Services, it's something which has always been more portable. It's always been something that has had the freedom to kind of move where the people who are maintaining it move.
Yeah, like one organization that you would collaborate with or team up with, was it the Invest in Open Infrastructure? I believe they just did a report.
So they've been doing some great work trying to understand what it means to set the guidance and policy around open infrastructure. And as you mentioned, they've just released this report, which we participated in some of the interviews for. And I think it's really interesting. I kind of wish I had their nice focus just on infrastructure, whereas we kind of go out from everything from the PhD students who are writing scripts to help with their thesis projects through to the large infrastructural projects. And I think one of the challenges that you sort of see is that the software sustainability affects all of this spectrum of different sizes of code, but it does it in different ways. And the approaches you take would not be the same depending on whether it is, this kind of like analysis code versus the sort of prototypes that are being developed out some of the research consortium through to the products that are being run by places like CERN with some of their infrastructure like Zenodo and so on. So you've got this really wide range of different types of software that you're trying to sustain. And it's really good. I think, again, back to the collaboration, there can't just be one software sustainability institute. We would never be able to do it all. And I think you need that cooperating community of different specialists. It's really good to see in the sort of 15 years since we've been going, so many others picking up specific areas of this space.
We've had Caitlin Taney and Emmy Tsang from IOI on this podcast before, and I'll drop those links in the show notes. I'm realizing we don't have CERN or IOI on the academic map, which I've been building over with some other people. Thank you so much, Regina and Mike Nolan, Regina and Ken Shore. Academic map, which I'll also drop in the link, but I will make sure that those pages are up there soon. Really, really exciting work. Now, you mentioned that software sustainability affects different sizes of code and different types of code differently, Neil. This is, in fact, an open source podcast, not a research podcast, as much as I keep trying to make it go that way. Can normal maintainers apply for this sort of funds? What are you calling research software versus just software that's open source and openly licensed?
So here, what we're defining as being in scope for this maintenance fund is that it's software which is being used by people who are outside of the immediate development group. So I have this idea of kind of like a key critical point in the evolution of a piece of software, or including a piece of research software, where it goes beyond the people who created it and their friends and their collaborators, and you start getting users who you've never met before. So what this is for is maintaining software which has got to that stage. So it's things which are following a lot of what I would consider to be the good practices around the open source community, even if the software itself isn't open source. So we would be here looking ideally for software which is being developed by a development team across multiple organizations, as opposed to something which is just a single maintainer. But if that single maintainer has created something that is being used by a wide cross-section of the community, then yes, it's open for them as well. In part, it's also a little bit of an experiment, because I think one of the things that we haven't quite worked out in the broader community is, how do we best fund software maintenance? And so part of this is also a bit of experimentation. So we've got a number of different rounds that we'll be running to work out what's the best way of putting smallest amounts of money. So in this case, the small size of projects that we're funding are £150,000 for a year, because we're trying to work out what are the sorts of things that a lot of projects are asking for, because then there might be a better way of providing that kind of resource.
I'm curious how this grant fits within the wider work that you're doing, because I don't know a priori whether 4.8 million is a major amount for you. Can you talk a bit more about the scope?
It is the kind of amount of money that you would see invested into sort of similar calls in the UK. I think it was either last year or the year before, for instance, there was a similar sized call that was being run by the Archer 2 team, that is the National Supercomputing Service, specifically to do something called the GPU ECSE. It's a lot of kind of acronyms, but basically it's a call to help support software that is running on high-performance computing centers to help port or improve code that's running on GPUs. And so if you think about it, the same amount of money roughly was given for that call. And so that was a very specialized call. So I think here the big difference is one of scope. It is also possibly the one that will give us the challenges, because it means there's a lot more behind the scenes work that will need to be done to help to manage the call and the applications. But again, it's something that we're looking to understand better, how to run programs like this. I think here, the thing that we benefit from is other programs, in particular, Chan Zuckerberg Initiative's Essential Open Source for Science program, which has been doing some really amazing things in understanding how to do evaluation of these kinds of programs. And so what we're looking to do here is similar kind of scope, similar amounts of funding to some of the things that have been going on in the past, and really trying to kind of take that further forward and understand, how do you ensure that you're running a program like this effectively? How can you make sure it reaches all the different kinds of people who might benefit from the funding? Because I think that's a really challenging one. It's always hard to make sure that all of the people that you might want to hear about something like this actually do hear about it.
What impact do you think the Chan Zuckerberg initiative has had in your work?
It's been really interesting to kind of see. And I think there's sort of two things that I've noticed. So one is really around what I'll call the kind of things that they funded in the biomedical space directly. So they are a foundation that is looking at the biomedical domain. And so they funded a lot of software that is in the biomedical domain. And I think the kind of really interesting thing about the way they've done it is about trying to cut some of the overhead of applying and trying to make sure that the right people in terms of the sort of roles that they can have can apply. Because traditionally in this space, you gained a lot of kudos if you're a professor in an eminent field, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're a great software developer or software product manager. So I think one of the kind of key things that they did was kind of following on from the work that we've done with research software engineers and raising the status of those is recognize that there are probably a whole different set of people who are better placed to lead software development projects and apply for the funding. But I think the kind of truly transformative things that they've done have been around some of the work that they've been doing to help support things that transcend the biomedical space. So providing funding for software that is used in biomedicine, but also has huge utility outside of that. So things around visualization, for instance. And I think that's really important because those pieces of software, even though they're really highly used, can often fall between the cracks of other funding, which tends to be much more discipline specific or for creating something which is kind of new and a competitor in the space rather than maintaining what you have. So I think in experimenting with the different types of funding, they've really kind of had a lot of impact.
I would agree they have had a lot of impact recently, but I think that's also building on the shoulders of other people. In one case, yourself. You've been really involved with the FAIR principles. You've been really involved in talking about RSEs. And I know you don't like taking the spotlight. So maybe not just you, but also the people, the kinds of things I've been seeing over the past few years, which has really changed the space. It used to be, we don't know how to fund software. Let's throw some money at some engineers. And now it's more, let's fund communities of practice. Let's fund initiatives like FAIR principles that help get data into a better state than it was. Another good example might be citation.cff, which is a way of citing your research software, right? It's saying if you put in your Git repo citation.cff file, it'll make it easier for people to cite you when they use you in your research. One of the things I'm curious about is that you talked about the cracks. Do you think there might be a space for non-research software engineers who are still maintainers of open source that are absolutely necessary to research software as a whole, but would never be called research software engineers? People like Mike McQuaid, another Edinburghian like you, works on Homebrew. Homebrew is not scientific software. It's not research software. It's used by every research software person. It's used by me, but it's not research software. So is there another thing that we should maybe be thinking about? Some sort of maintainer schema that would be useful?
Oh, yeah, that's a really good thing to bring up because that's kind of pointing to where is the distinction. And there have been some amazing debates. I'll call them debates rather than really heated shouting matches around where you draw the line. And I kind of think I'm more of the pragmatist who says you can't draw the line. It's kind of like trying to define what science fiction is. You can define what's clearly science fiction. You can define what's clearly research software. But trying to kind of create some sort of arbitrary cutoff point is really hard. And there's loads of open source software. It's widely used. A lot of it is used for research purposes. Some of it is supporting research workflows. But I think one of the big challenges we have is really just understanding how people are using software and therefore coming up with some sort of system that allows this credit and then perhaps resources to flow to the things that really are part of a research team's workflow.
It seems like the way things are changing is LLMs. And I want to know, how have LLMs, with the rise of LLMs, come to change SSI? Look, Richard can shake his head all he wants, but I talk to developers every day, and that's one of the changes that's happening in the industry.
Yeah. And so this was all coming up as we were kind of putting in our proposal to get the latest round of core funding. And it was just starting back then I guess in 2022. But it's a really, really interesting thing because effectively we've spent the last 10 years building up and professionalizing a whole career path for all of these people who got disillusioned after doing their PhDs and wanted a place, somewhere they could feel like they were having a worthwhile contribution through the development of software. And all of a sudden, it's all being shaken up. I think we haven't entirely got to grasp with it. I think this is one of the things that it came up last year in our collaborations workshop. It's going to come up again this year. I think it's going to be something where we see a shift happening in the role of what it means to develop research software. And I think the kind of key thing here is that whereas previously researchers were getting a bit overwhelmed with trying to keep on top of all of the things that were happening and the changes in the way that you do software development, now they can just turn to all of the different code assistants, Copilot, etc., and write, particularly if they're in something like Python or R, perfectly reasonable code. I feel like it's like suddenly with everyone having smartphones, all of a sudden the world of photography, like proper professional grade photography, is opened up to them. And then the question is, can they use it well? And you'll have some people who will automatically be able to use it well. And then you'll have other people who need to be guided. And so I think that's also a place where research software engineers, and particularly those involved in training, will be really important. But then there's also the other part of it, which is, I guess, if I'm taking this sort of smartphone, social media analogy too far, the people who help with the disinformation. So there's also going to be a role, I think, increasingly for research software engineers to understand how you validate and verify the code that's being produced by researchers using LLMs. But it's fascinating. I still think there's a lot of places where they don't do very well. And so if you,
absolutely,
like me, grew up with Fortran, they're still not very good at parallelizing Fortran. But that's going to change. That's going to change really rapidly. I think the way that we develop code is changing before our eyes.
Not just code. I mean, it's science as a whole. There's a whole stupid AI shtick that you can pay $20,000 now for a PhD level AI, which makes no sense to me. And you could just pay a PhD for a year on that money. So it's very curious. But it is changing how we do research, and it is changing how we code as a whole. So lots to watch for in this space, I guess.
Indeed. I just hope that we don't go down the route, which I've seen now a few times, where the AI has written the code, the AI has analyzed the results, and the AI has tested the results against itself.
And nature, the AI is also reviewing the paper at the end of the day. So excellent. Great.
So my wife used to work in journalism, and that's been decimated by AI because basically you now have the AI generate the press release, the AI rewriting the press release to maximize the clicks that are being generated by AIs clicking on web pages. So you've now taken the humans entirely out of the loop in technology journalism. And I think that's a sad state of affairs, and I hope it doesn't happen in science.
Neil, it's been great chatting with you. We are running up on time. There's a lot more I could ask and we could talk about at length, but for now, that's it. So we have this UKRI grant, and that's open currently. You can find it on the website, so do go check that out. Does that only apply to British citizens?
It's not British citizens, but the lead organization must be a UK research organization. Partners can be from elsewhere in the world.
Cool, just like Horizon Europe or something else, so feel free to collaborate as much as you can. And if you want to collaborate with Neil, you can find him on software.ac.uk. Not Neil specifically, of course, but you know what I mean. I'm not trying to open you up to all collaboration in the future, although maybe that would be nice. Maybe you want that. Yeah, go ahead. Email Neil. Neil, where can people find you on the web besides software.ac.uk?
You can normally find me at NPCH on various types of social media, on LinkedIn, all your normal sites.
All right, Neil, thank you so much for coming on. This has been great. You can find those links in the show notes, everyone. But don't leave yet. At the end of every show, we have Spotlight, part of the show where we highlight other people, projects, or things that we think are awesome that just need a little bit of light shed on them. Justin Dorfman, what is your Spotlight today?
Ghost TTY. It's a terminal written by Mitchell Hashimoto of HashiCorp, Vagrant, and all those fun things. It's a really great terminal emulator. It's fast and I really enjoy it. So yeah, Ghost TTY on Google, I guess.
I was in a rainstorm after trying to ban some petrol chicks a few months ago, and my phone died because it got totally soaked. And it was really unfortunate. I lost a ton of recordings. And so I went out on the suggestion of Anamika, thank you, Anamika, and bought this Olympus Tough camera. If you don't have an Olympus Tough camera, it is the best because I can use this when I go scuba diving. I can just drop it into a river to take photos of eels. I can also use it to take super high zoom in photos of things, and it's relatively cheap. If you just want a really nice point and shoot that does both macro and underwater stuff and won't die in a rainstorm, I really can't suggest the Olympus Tough series. They're amazing. Highly suggest everyone get them. This is my new go out into the world and botanize or entomologize or all the things with the Olympus stuff. So thank you, Olympus, for making great products. Neil, what's your Spotlight today?
Yeah, so I mentioned the Carpentries earlier in the podcast, and that was really the thing that brought me into kind of the way of open source, effectively, kind of doing things as a community. But I'd like to spotlight something else from my other career in the arts, which is Cinema for All, which is a similar organization, which is all about making sure that people who are running all of the different community cinemas and not-for-profit cinemas in the UK and the similar organizations across the world can get the resources and, most importantly, know that they're not alone. So it's all about making sure that cinema and the joy of watching film is available to anyone wherever they are. And I think it follows all of the best parts of the open source community principles.
If you're in Edinburgh, go to the film house if you can. Although the film house gone, the Cameo's still there though, right?
The film house is going to open its doors later this year. So
that's amazing. I did not know that. That makes me so happy. Many fond memories of those two cinemas. They're the best. Don't go to the castle. It's boring. All right. Neil, thank you so much for coming on. It's been awesome to have you. It's been really great to have this conversation. Listeners, you've also been part of this conversation, and there are a few things that you can do now to talk about it and share. One, talk about it and share. Tell your friends. It'd be really, really great. This podcast only gets out by you telling other people. We don't do a ton of advertising, and that's kind of on purpose. When we do it on Blue Sky and Mastodon and LinkedIn, so do go follow us on all those things. Go to podcast.sustainoss.org to find the show notes for this podcast where you can find really awesome links. Also see past episodes and also check out other cool stuff. Sustainoss.org is where you can find the rest of the things Sustain does. We have a forum coming up in 4 days, which you probably can't get to because this will come out in the past at that point. But it'll be really fun to hear about how we're talking about open source in the future. And you should check in with us on our discourse.sustainoss.org to talk about other cool things that are happening in Sustain. Besides that, please go to opencollective.com/SustainOSS and donate if you think that you can do so. That'd be really cool. The reason we have not had a lot of podcasts over the past few months is because we are running down on our podcast funding. And it would be really awesome to continue to make podcasts once a week. And that will not happen without more funding. So talk to your funders about it. That would be really cool. Maybe I should just talk to people who are really good at getting funding, like Neil. Speaking of which, if you want to talk to Neil, you should also apply to this grant and maybe go to the collaboration workshop in Stirling in May, which you can also do online. Just dropping the link back in. It's in the show notes again. Neil, thank you so much. It was great having you on, and keep up the good work.
Thank you.